Ever wondered what would happen if the Goonies was smashed together with every pop culture reference you could think of? Well, wonder no longer as we count down to Stranger Things Season 3 by rewatching and reviewing Season 1 and 2. Now, spoiler alert, if you've not seen them, I would head over to Netflix first, give them a watch. If you've seen them, go back and watch them, refresh your memory. But join me as we take a look at Season 1. The first scene starts the show as pure horror, and that's what this show does so well. It keeps a mystery and it slowly unfolds it over the season. So in episode 1 we get sort of shadows, we get an idea that there's a creature there. Then slowly we'll see it appear behind people. We'll see what happens to somebody. We don't necessarily see the creature itself. Then eventually we see a flicker of its face. We see its whole body. We see its layer. We start to see all of this story build up. And that's what the show does perfectly. We then jump into my favourite reference of the show, which is Dungeons and Dragons. For this very reason, I love Mike as the Dungeon Master.
The Demogorgon, it got me.
This is probably the sweetest foreshadowing we could get, as eventually the Demogorgon does get Will. The first reveal of the Demogorgon actually gives me a heart attack every time. The show starts as pure horror, but I promise it gets easier. The strange thing is, we then don't properly see Will again until Season 2. We do get him briefly at the end, but you don't really flesh out the character much in this season at all. We get flashbacks, but we don't see the full group and the full story until Season 2. Which is a really weird dynamic to introduce the group and then take a pivotal member away, but it works perfectly. Obviously that's a massive issue for Will's family when he disappears, which is the big plot for Season 1. Winona Ryder and Charlie Heaton's performances carry this show. We then meet Barb, who became a fan favourite for Season 1, and everyone was gutted when eventually she dies. We then meet Steve Harrington, who's a bit of a dick.
Idiot Steve Harrington.
Oh well, yeah, right on. But at the minute he is Nancy's love interest until Jonathan gets his groove on. Like I've already said, the thing this show does perfectly is character development and building up its mystery. Steve's a prime example of this. You'll hate him this season. Slowly towards the end he has a redemption arc, and by Season 2 he's probably your favourite character. Lucky for us, the very next scene hits on my other point of building a mystery. From a bizarre growth on the wall to our introduction to Eleven. This show is steeped in references to Lord of the Rings, the Jaws poster, Radagast. This can be massively off-putting for some people, too many references forced down your throat. I'm a massive sucker for it, so every time they mention someone I love, I sort of feel like nostalgia for it, which is a really cheap way to get me to enjoy the show, but there's so many other likeable moments. After being introduced to Benny, who looks after Eleven for a few heartwarming scenes, we then find out Eleven's powers, and unfortunately Benny's killed off as well. Rest in peace, Benny. Then Sheriff Hopper does start to piece things together, he starts taking it a little more seriously. Again, another great character arc. We see him as this cop that doesn't really care at the start, he's sort of lethargic to the job. Nothing ever happens in this town, which is kind of a cliche for a story, but you do see eventually there's a reason he doesn't care anymore, there's a reason he does certain things in the story, and inevitably there's a reason he becomes a fan favourite in Season 2. And even during this season, just sort of how he takes the mystery, pieces it together, he's pretty much us watching the show. As great as the monsters and mysteries are in this show though, it's the family and friend relationships that are what mean the most to this show. And like I was just saying, throughout the season, Hopper's side plot of his daughter adds a real depth to his character, and it's a heartbreaking history to the man. Then we get the now infamous Ego scene. Although Will is missing, like I said, we do get some backstory through flashbacks, and we get this nice moment of him and Jonathan bonding over music. Music is another high point of this series. Unfortunately, I can't include any of that because of monetization rules and copyright and stuff like that, which sucks, but I mean, if you've seen the series, you know what I mean. It's The Clash, there's so many songs in it, but that's sort of the iconic one. And you probably know the song anyway, so as well as flashbacks for Will, we get flashbacks for Eleven, which just make us feel worse and worse for the character. With all the high praise I'm giving the show though, I should point out parts that I don't necessarily like as much. And because of the nature of the show and how it's written, it relies far too heavily on these flashbacks to paint any kind of picture. Which I think it's a weird dynamic that would take Will away rather than build some of this story before. Like, even an episode before he disappears would have given us more about the character, care more for the character, and the characters around him. Slowly we get more and more about where Will is, and then we get to one of my favourite scenes. Oh, that hurts me. As a D&D player, that hurts me. She could have just moved them. Okay, I'm just gonna power on. This scene makes you really feel bad for Barb, and you remember why you love her so much now. She's the angel on Nancy's shoulder, which eventually she embraces more of, but in this scene she sort of forgets her friend, tells her to leave. You feel terrible for her. Like, fuck you, Steve. Episode 2 finishes with Jonathan being a real creep and the eventual death of Barb. Then at the start of the next episode we get our first proper view of the Demogorgon, which looks incredible. The effects, like, whoever did that, great job. Then Nancy gets hers as Barb has to fight off the Demogorgon. Nice guys or girls truly do finish last, as she's dropped off into the abyss. This is the first time we see the Upside Down and realise it's everywhere. It's where they are, but in an alternate universe almost, an alternate dimension, which is so cool and leads to some cool developments later on in the story. Is that a Jaws poster on Will's wall? First D&D, now this. Will is just me as a child. I mean, after what he did, you shouldn't really feel bad, but losing his camera, you feel like he's losing everything, so you do feel terrible for this character. We eventually empathise with the characters, which is an impressive thing to do, considering how much we hate some of them at the minute. Like, at the minute, Steve comes across an asshole, Nancy a bit of a coward, just sort of follows the crowd. But what they accomplished by making us root for these characters, and in season 2, them being the main point of the show, like, we want to see them succeed, is an incredible thing to do. It's an interesting... that's what I mean when I say how well these characters are developed, how much of an arc there truly is, which leads into season 2 being a bit more fun and upbeat. The episode comes to an end with the most iconic scene of the show, as the lights begin to light up as Will communicates with his mum the words, "Run." We're then hit with a curveball as Will is fished out of the river dead. What the what? Whether or not you felt it was real, you felt what the characters were going through as Mike fell out with 11, Mum freaks out, Jonathan freaks out, Hopper freaks out, nobody can quite believe what's happened. It doesn't take long to realise Will is actually still alive, but how? Hopper isn't really one to be outdone, so when he realises someone out of state did the autopsy, something twigs. If I had to pick 5 favourite scenes, this would be one of them. It's such an adorable moment, and again, a scene where the show shines with the child actors.
Wow. She looks
Pretty.
Turns out old Peepin' John caught a Demogorgon in his picture. Now take that to the police and... oh, okay, or take it to your stalker, that's cool. That's because Hopper is drinking whiskey and punching civilians, and he's all out of whiskey. We then get a genuinely cute moment between Jonathan and Nancy, bathed in red, of the photo room, not blood. And they develop this terrifying shot that... seeing that again still gives me the creeps. Punch Cop then continues punch copping. This guy needs his own season, but he does reveal that Will's body is a dummy, which adds another level of creepy. Think how lucky he is with that though, he just stabs the knife right in. Imagine the scene if he wasn't. At this point it's halfway through the season and Punch Cop is tired of punching and manhandling his way through Hawkins' lab. As much as it's there for exposition, I love the teacher's explanation of how things work in the show. The show then builds tension within the gang and I know you shouldn't laugh, but the slide looked goofy as hell. The show does well on showing the characters' flaws, then develops them and makes us root for them in the end as heroes. It's a show for and of outcasts. Slowly the story unravels as the connection between Eleven and the Demogorgon is revealed, perfectly leading into the final act. These bullies are assholes, but are they really about to commit homicide? 11 saving the day really sums up the show and a great end to episode 6, leading into 7 and 8. The penultimate episode then kicks it up to 11, pun intended, as the next 2 episodes just really gun it. But before we get into that, we've got the still pretty scene.
Still pretty?
Yeah. Pretty. Really pretty.
It probably beats out the original scene, but we needed that scene for explanation and backstory to it. But this one's so much more innocent and it shows how vulnerable she is after everything. And even as a young boy, Mike gets it. That's because of this guy right here.
What did I do?
Then we get the scene of them riding. It feels like E.T. There's so many Spielberg references in this, like, it's unbelievable. We got the Jaws, we've got Goonies, we've got all these stories. It's just, yeah, there's so many. Steve begins a long redemption arc by removing the graffiti he did, so 10 points to Slytherin. Don't worry, he transfers to Gryffindor next season. Finally, after all investigating the same thing for a whole season, all the characters meet up, which leads perfectly into next episode as the plot begins to wrap up. That's what I mean about this show. The pacing, I would find it hard to find anything to compare it to. It perfectly unravels everything, develops the characters, the story, all in perfect timing, so that is a massive plus point for this for me.
You always say we should never stop being curious, to always open any curiosity door we find.
Dustin.
Why are you keeping this curiosity door locked?
Come on, open the curiosity door, man. I realise I keep saying this, but this is another favourite scene of mine.
Do you like Jonathan now?
No. No, it's not. Do you like 11?
What? No, ew. Gross.
They do an amazing job of creating a real brother-sister relationship. There's so much I love about this final episode, but 11 making it to the Upside Down before the final scene of the Demogorgon. There's so much I love about this episode, and the fact that the Demogorgon has found Will adds real tension and urgency to the final episode. Their search is intertwined with story of Hopper's daughter, which really tugs at your heartstrings when he bursts out saying things like, "Are you okay?" and stuff, and it just feels like he's talking to his daughter. Or the fact that he's still caring for Joyce in this moment with everything going on in his head just paints a picture of the character he is. Steve walks in on the emergence of the Demogorgon, and it's probably a good thing he does. He really puts in some work with that bat. The fact they talk about a future together just means it's going to end in tears, and knowing how this episode ends, it's a little bit gutting. This scene is written so well and acted so well as Mike tries to explain being more than friends as children. Hopper and Joyce find Will, and 11 makes the ultimate sacrifice, or so we think, to defeat a Demogorgon. Or so we think. The season wraps with a perfect teaser with the possibility of 11 being alive and the Upside Down still thriving inside of Will. Or Will thriving inside of the Upside Down. I'm not sure. For me, this season had the retro vibes of Stephen King, meeting the wonder and awe of Spielberg, and it's a must-see. Like I said before, we'll be looking at Season 2 next week, but you can catch all of this on Netflix, and Season 3 airs in July, I think it's the 7th, so we will eventually get to that. We'll do an episode by episode breakdown of that. But until next time.